Chronicles of the Grim Reaper. The Choice by Griz Calderon. Henry lay motionless on the cold concrete, the sounds around him muffled and distant. His body was broken, twisted at unnatural angles, and pain shot through him with every shallow breath. He could barely keep his eyes open, but when he did, he caught glimpses of the chaos around him. Fellow workers shouting, their voices distant, muffled, like they were underwater, the screeching of cranes coming to a halt, and the blaring of sirens in the distance. The air was filled with dust and the metallic scent of blood. His blood. He tried to move, to lift his arm, but his body refused to obey. His thoughts were a jumble of confusion and pain, but one thing was clear. He was badly hurt, possibly dying. The wind whipped through the open construction site, and as he lay there, his mind began to drift. He thought of his wife, of his 2 sons, and the life they had built together. They had always worried about him working at such heights, but he had reassured them time and time again that he was careful, that he knew what he was doing. Now, he wasn't so sure. Henry was no stranger to the dangers of his job. As a builder working on high-rise buildings, he knew that every day came with risks. But he had never imagined that one of those risks would change his life, or end it. The morning of the accident, Henry was up on the 30th floor of the building, securing steel beams. The wind was strong, but he was used to that. His hands were steady, his mind focused on the task at hand. Suddenly, something went wrong. The crane operator above him miscalculated the swing of a massive steel beam, and before Henry could react, the beam came crashing down, clipping the scaffolding where he stood. Time seemed to slow as Henry felt the impact. The scaffolding beneath him gave way, and he was thrown off balance. He reached out, grabbing for anything to stop his fall, but his hands found only air. He remembered the sudden lurch, the feeling of weightlessness as he fell, the sickening crunch as he hit the ground below. The pain had been instant, searing through his body like wildfire. Now, as he lay there, he felt his life slipping away, his vision darkening around the edges. The next few moments were a blur of pain and confusion. Henry felt a searing pain in his chest, his ribs cracking under the pressure. The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent as they assessed the situation. Henry could barely hear them over the roar in his ears, but he knew they were trying to save him. They lifted him onto a stretcher, the world spinning as they moved. He tried to focus, to hold on, but it was so hard. His vision dimmed as he lay there, surrounded by pain. It was too much. Everything went black. When he came to, he was in the back of an ambulance, the sirens wailing as they sped through the streets. The paramedics were working frantically, their faces tense with concentration. They didn't give up. Henry could feel his life slipping away, the edges of his vision darkening once more. He knew he was in bad shape. He could feel it in the way his body refused to respond, in the numbness that was creeping over him. Henry thought of his family waiting for him at home as he began to fade. As Henry hovered on the brink of consciousness, something strange happened. He became aware of another presence in the ambulance. It was a figure cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood, holding a scythe in its skeletal hand. Henry should have been terrified, but instead, he felt a strange sense of calm. The Reaper stood silently beside him, watching as the paramedics worked to save his life. "You know why I'm here, Henry," the Reaper said, his voice low and resonant, echoing within Henry's mind rather than through the air. Henry swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Am I going to die?" "No, Henry, you are not going to die. the Reaper replied, stepping closer, the scythe gleaming ominously in the dim light of the ambulance. The Reaper tilted his head slightly. You have a choice to make. You will survive this accident, but it will come at a high cost, not only to you and your family, but to the lives of others. Those who desperately need what you can give will perish. Henry's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision placed before him. Who? He managed to ask. Who would die if I live? The Reaper extended a hand, and suddenly the scene around them shifted. They were no longer in the ambulance. Instead, they stood in a small, sterile hospital room. Henry looked around, bewildered, and then his gaze fell on the figure lying in the bed. A teenage boy, not older than 15, clung to life by a thread. His body was frail and weak, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically in the silence. His skin pale, his eyes sunken, and his family gathered around him, their faces etched with despair, knowing that their time with him was running out. This boy, the Reaper said softly, he needs a heart. Your heart could save his life, but if you live, he will die tonight. Henry felt tears in his eyes as he watched the boy's mother clutching his hand, her eyes red from crying. The boy's father stood by the window, staring out blankly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Henry could feel their hopelessness, their grief, and it tore at his heart. It's not just him, the Reaper continued, and with a wave of his hand, they were in another room, another hospital. A middle-aged woman lay in a bed, her eyes closed, her breathing labored. Her family was there too, whispering prayers, holding on to whatever hope they had left. This woman, the Reaper said, is on the verge of death. She needs a liver transplant, and soon. Without it, she will not survive the night. Henry's heart ached as he looked at the woman and her family. He thought of his own wife and 2 sons, how they would feel if they were in this situation. The woman's mother was holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. Her father stood by the bed, his expression one of hopelessness, as if he had already lost his daughter. And it's not just the boy and the woman, the Reaper continued. With a wave of his hand, the scene changed again. They were now in a different hospital room, and then another, and another. Each one held a patient in desperate need, some waiting for kidneys, lungs, or other organs. Henry saw a woman with her father at her side, a young man with his fiancée holding his hand, and an elderly man surrounded by his grown children. Each family was preparing to say goodbye, clinging to the last threads of hope. Henry felt tears well up in his eyes. "Why are you showing me this? You said I was not going to die," he asked, his voice trembling. The Reaper turned to face him, his dark hooded robe rustling softly. "Because you have a choice, Henry. You will survive this accident. But if you do, these people will die. You were meant to live, but you have the power to change all of these people's lives. You can choose to sacrifice your life and give them a chance to live. Your organs could save many lives, including the boy's, whose soul I was to harvest tonight. The choice is yours." Henry was silent, contemplating the choice that was put before him. "Henry," the Reaper said gently, interrupting his thoughts, "I must collect a soul tonight. Whether it's yours or the boy's, it's up to you." Henry felt his heart pound in his chest. The thought of dying was terrifying, but the thought of living at the cost of others' lives was unbearable. He pictured his wife, his sons, He had always been there for them, and the idea of leaving them behind was almost too much to bear. The Reaper stood quietly, allowing Henry to process everything he had seen. Henry's thoughts turned to his own family, his wife, his 2 sons. "What about my family?" Henry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How will they manage without me?" The Reaper placed a skeletal hand on Henry's shoulder, a surprisingly gentle touch. "Your family will grieve, but they will also find strength in your sacrifice. Your wife will be cared for, and your sons will grow up knowing their father was a man of great courage and compassion. They will understand that you made this choice out of love, for them and for others. And you will not truly leave them. You will always be with them in spirit, guiding them, watching over them." Henry's tears fell freely now as he thought of his sons, the way they looked up to him, the way they would carry on without him. He thought of his wife, how strong she was, how she would guide them through this. And he thought of those other families, the ones who would lose their loved ones if he chose to live. He also knew that it was a new beginning for those whose lives he would save. Henry closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. The decision weighed heavily on him, but in his heart he knew what he had to do. "I'll do it," Henry whispered. "I'll give my life for them, for the boy and the others. Tell my family that I love them and that I'm at peace with this decision." The Reaper nodded, a look of solemn respect in his eyes. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain, Henry. You will give others the chance to continue their lives. Your family will understand, and they will find peace." Henry closed his eyes, his heart filled with a deep sense of fulfillment. He had done what was right, what was necessary. His life was ending, but in doing so, he was giving others a chance to live. The pain in his body began to fade, and he knew that his decision had been the right one. "Will they know?" he asked. "Will they know why I did this?" "Yes," the Reaper said. "As they mourn your loss, they will feel your presence, and they will know that you are at peace." The Reaper raised his scythe, and as he did, Henry felt a warmth spread through him. The hospital room faded away, replaced by darkness, and then by light, a soft, comforting light. Henry knew he was passing on, but he also knew that he was leaving something behind, something that would live on in the lives of those he had saved. Back in the operating room, Henry's body was failing. The surgeons worked desperately to save him, but it was too late. His heart stopped, and the machines flatlined. His family, waiting outside, was informed of his death. Amid their grief, the doctors approached them with a difficult question, a question about organ donation. And despite their sorrow, Henry's wife and sons made the decision to honor his memory by giving life to others. It was as if they knew this was Henry's last wish. As Henry's soul stood beside the Reaper, watching his family through the window, he felt a deep sense of peace. He saw them hold each other, finding strength in their love and in knowing that he had made a difference. The Reaper turned to Henry, his hooded face softening with a touch of respect. "You made the right choice, Henry. Your sacrifice will save many lives, and your family is proud of you. They will carry your memory with them, and they will be strong." Henry nodded, tears of both sadness and joy in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady, "for giving me the choice." The Reaper placed a hand on Henry's back, guiding him toward the light. "It's time to rest now, Henry. Your journey here is over, but there is more waiting for you." Henry looked back one last time, seeing his family standing together, united in their grief, but also in their love. He knew he would see them again, and when he did, it would be as if no time had passed at all. With a final breath, Henry stepped into the light, the reaper by his side, and the world faded away, leaving behind only peace. The end.